Empty the chamber on them. And how do you do that? First 6 seconds, point A to point B, everything you got. Everything you got. Turn that shit up. Let's go. Welcome to the Scoop World Order College Football Expansion Edition. This is a very hot topic right now, and we have the preeminent insider in the entire game in Nevadabuck on our side, ready to kind of lay it down. Let us know where everything's going. The college football landscape has shifted dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years in terms of conference realignment. Obviously, with Oklahoma and Texas joining the SEC, there's a lot of big fish that are still out there. One of the biggest ones is one that we're going to be real excited about, and Nevada and I are going to talk about it. So we know you love the content. We appreciate your love. We appreciate your likes, your comments. Comment on this one. Who is your one dream team that you wish could join the Big Ten? Give us a like and a subscribe. As always, we appreciate you. We are growing. It is not an accident. Thank you, Scoop family. Thank you, Buckeye Nation. This has been fantastic. So without further ado, my man, Nevadabuck, how are you today?
I'm doing great. This is kind of an exciting time of the year, and hey, great to be here. This is exciting times, and lots of big things happening on the expansion and television contract and how that kind of works into super conferences. So, a lot to talk about today, and I'm sure excited to talk with everybody about it.
Well, yeah, we're gonna get right into that because we talk a lot on the phone, and I mean you brought up some stuff with the TV contracts today, and kind of explain to the people the evolution of why television, there was a substantial change that a business partner of yours picked up on, and it changed the entire game for what you called appointment television. Talk a little bit about that and how that's led to this massive boon in the TV money department for these conferences.
Well, I talked about doing work with a guy that was a really forward-thinking guy, a huge television entertainment executive, and I was in his office one day and he was telling me about this new thing called TiVo and how that was going to change everything. And back then everything was appointment television, and you watched Frasier on Thursday night or Friends, and gathered around the television on Sunday night for Bonanza or whatever the heck. And he was like, look, you're going to be able to edit out the commercials, and that's going to change everything. And it's going to drive up the rights of live sports. They're going to be the last bastion of, embedded ads because everybody else is watching it. And I didn't really get it, but he kept talking about it every day for years. And I finally kind of figured out where he was driving, and he ended up making some really interesting transactions in the sports world, made a lot of money doing it. But, sometimes things change, and you just have to not only figure out that there's going to be change, but then figure out what the implications of the change are. And I think with the television contracts that are coming for the Big Ten, it's going to set off a lot of kind of unintended consequences on down the road.
Yeah. And when you say like major sports things, it's like we were talking earlier today about how the value of sports franchises have gone up massively over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And that's the kind of thing you're talking about, how something is worth, $200-300 million yesterday or 10 years ago. And now something's worth $4 or $5 billion. And I was like, what triggered that? And you said, the TV rights, and that was absolutely fascinating. And you think that you can see something similar with the conferences as they continue to expand the playoffs potentially?
Well, yeah, because right now, the NFL is king, but college football is the crown prince, and right now the crown jewel of all college football is the playoff. So there's talk about expansion of the playoff, and the implications of that. If you went down to smaller, super conferences, say 40 to 50 teams, 45, 48, whatever the number is, you're talking about splitting that pie, not 130 ways, but you're talking about 48 ways. And then we'll get into this a little bit deeper in this conversation. But I think some of the conferences that have the big television deals are going to be even, better positioned to do it. And they're going to need to be because NIL right now is kind of wreaking havoc on all the teams. Everybody's kind of scrambling. And the one thing that's bailing everything out, because right now attendance is down at college football. Attendance is down at college sports across the board. But the one thing's up is television revenues and the potential for television revenues. And, the Big Ten contract is, we can get right into that right now, is, somewhere a little bit north of 50 million. The latest projections that I'm hearing is that it's going to be well north of 100, maybe 112, 113 million dollars a year per Big Ten school, and that's a major change, and that's a seismic shift to the college football television broadcast revenue landscape.
Yeah, I mean, it's doubling in basically 5 years. So with that, we talk expansion, and there's always a dream school that we wish we could add to the Big Ten. For me, that is the University of Southern California, because what an amazing thing it would be to be able to relive that rivalry constantly as an Ohio State fan, be able to go out to Los Angeles maybe every other year, if we're lucky. I don't know if they'd be in the same division or how that would work, but if it's every 3 or 4 years, I think our fans would travel in droves out to the Coliseum. I think a lot of Big Ten fans would travel in droves out to LA. Tell me what you're hearing about specifically the University of Southern California and the Big Ten, and then go from there in terms of who's in play and what else you're hearing.
Well, I mean, the reality is that the Pac-12 television contract is, it's going to be substantially less than the Big Ten television contract. And when you're talking about orders of magnitude, you're talking about 40, 50, 60 million dollars a year less. And it's 3 or 4 years out on the horizon. So, over 10, 12, 15 years, which is the lifetime of this contract, you're talking about potentially $1 billion less into the coffers of a school like USC as compared to a Big Ten school. So given that, USC is aggressively looking at potentially, moving into the Big Ten. And it's an economic reality. It's an economic reality that they discussed with Lincoln Riley when he came over from Oklahoma. It's the economic reality that drove Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC, who's also the other conference that's got the mega television contract. And, for the Big Ten right now, I think you're looking at brands, you're looking at markets, you're looking at expansion that makes sense. And that puts schools like Washington with the Seattle market, Colorado with the Denver market, and USC, as you said, with that coveted Los Angeles market, really squarely on the expansion, targets for the Big Ten. And I think it's implied. I've heard it more and more and more from my USC contacts. I've been hearing this for 6 months. I know these things they happen slow, but I think it's definitely something that's being discussed. And I think it's something that could happen. I think it's inevitable that something happens, because you cannot be at such an economic disadvantage going forward and expect to be a college football powerhouse. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think something's got to give. After you lose Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC, the Big 12 obviously lost their 2 crown jewels, and if USC would move to the Big Ten, it relegates it. It really turns it into 2 super conferences. I think the ACC. It just seems like they're going to get absorbed by the SEC sooner than later. This is just one of those fascinating topics that people across the country think about. I don't know if war is the correct word, but it's always intriguing when you have some of these rivalries that can be renewed, like Texas joining the old Southwest Conference with Arkansas, and then Ohio State USC, which is like that's about the best Rose Bowl matchup you could ever dream of. And we potentially could see it every 3 or 4 years. Like our fans would love to go to Seattle. I was fortunate to play at Washington in 2007, and it's such a beautiful, magnificent stadium right on the water, boats pulled up. The stadium is incredibly loud acoustically. They put it's where they cover from 40 to 40 with this roof, and it's like your mind is erased because it is just so loud between the 40s there, and it's really cool. But I think our fans would get a kick out of getting out of kind of the Midwest and being able to go see Seattle, take the wife, take the kids, go out to LA, kick it, see another part of the country, and then see the Buckeyes. Because I think our fans love going to the Rose Bowl, and I think that the opportunity to go see USC every 3 or 4 years, go to LA would be fantastic for our fan base. And And I think that every fan base of the Big Ten would enjoy that. I think that Iowa would travel there. I think Nebraska. I think Michigan. It would just give you an excuse to go out to the left coast and see it for 3 or 4 days, and then head home and watch your team play and root them on. So I'm excited. You got any other further things on expansion while we are on this topic?
Well, I just think that, like you said, the expansion is inevitable. It's inevitable, and you've got haves and you've got have-nots, and for the have schools, like a school like USC, how can you possibly sit there and say, yeah, it's going to be okay. We'll accept 50, 60, $70 million a year less for the honor of being part of the Pac-12. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And, I think, it kind of bleeds into our next topic, super conferences. But I think the conference affiliations are going to become more irrelevant once you get to the super conferences, and that could be another thing that drives USC to make a move like this.
Yeah, and we talked earlier, kind of potentially like an NFL type of model where, in Los Angeles, there's the Rams and the Chargers. One is in the AFC, one's in the NFC. So it's not like a regionally specific type thing like it is in baseball or basketball or even hockey. Because in football, the travel's less. I mean, you only travel to 6 or 7 road games a year. So you're not on the road 41 games like a basketball team is, or like a hockey team is, or baseball. So, you're not really as restricted by the geography like you are in other sports where they have to play more games. Like in football, you can get on a flight and, if you're flying 2 hours, what's 3 hours? It doesn't really matter, So talk a little bit about that, the super conference aspect. And you're right, with the haves and have-nots and, with things like NIL and transfer portal and facilities, I mean, money is the mecca right now, and it always has been, but the chasm, I feel like, is getting wider and wider by the day between the superpowers and the lesser schools. And talk a little bit about that and how that'll impact the potential super conferences.
Well, I mean, right now you've got 130 Division I football programs, but the reality is, they're not all playing the same game. And, you've got some that can compete at the highest levels and a bunch that can't. And I think the magic number is somewhere between 40 and 50. We've talked about 48 being a nice, even number in terms of things. But I think that what people have to start thinking about college football is like the NFL model. Imagine an NFL model where you have 48 teams instead of 32 or whatever it is in the NFL. You've got 48 teams, a 48-team league that's competing for the college football national championship. And what would make this thing interesting is that they're talking about indexing the amount of money, again, because you've got billions of dollars going for the playoff. Instead of dividing it by 130, you're dividing it by 48. So now you see how the money's gotten a lot bigger. But also, if your television contract is bigger, say like a Big Ten contract, which is twice as big as a Pac-10 contract, then the Big Ten schools would be receiving 2 shares of the television contract money for the expansion. So that would increase the delta even more between the Pac-10 schools and the Big Ten schools. And I think, now the numbers you're talking about are astronomical, but it's, I think that's what people have to start thinking about, the super conference. Super conference is not going to be really relevant whether you're from the Big Ten or from the Pac-10 of the ACC. You're going to be part of this league, the super conference league that's playing for this college football national championship. I think it could lead to expansion of games. I think you could see it eventually move to 12 regular season games, 14 regular season games, more like a NFL type of schedule where you play your in-conference games and then you have your out-of-conference games set. And I think college football as we know it is going to be changed dramatically here in the next 5-10 years, and this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, and as you negotiate these television contracts, something that would be obviously appealing is when you kind of separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of the strength of schedule. Because if you cut out, of the Big Ten, if you cut out Rutgers and Purdue and, kind of the, not Northwestern, but, Northwestern, the teams that generally were, two touchdown favorites or more against, and you replace that with, say, Alabama or Georgia or Florida or Texas or USC or whatever. I mean, imagine what that would do for the TV money. I mean, because that's the thing about the NFL is like, I mean, there's, I mean, Urban Meyer gets dragged for being at Jacksonville, and they say he's the worst NFL coach of all time, but he beat the Buffalo Bills last year, and Buffalo was really good. They have a superstar quarterback. They're one of the, they beat the Chiefs. I mean, they beat really good teams, and Jacksonville, the worst team in the NFL, beat them last year. So, the competitive, ability of teams to actually beat each other week in, week out is something that I think would obviously be really appealing for television. Because like with Ohio State, I mean, outside of Michigan, maybe Notre Dame, and maybe on a given year, Wisconsin or an Iowa, and maybe like a fluke game like a Purdue or some weird game like that, generally, like you're not really too stressed out about many of Ohio State's games, especially they play a couple out of conference teams that are usually terrible. And then they play the bad teams in the Big Ten, like Rutgers and Michigan State, and beat the Illinois, beat the tar out of those guys, Nebraska. And it's just not exciting television. But like when all of a sudden you replace those teams with, say, USC or, Georgia or, I mean, Clemson or whoever's in this quote unquote super conference, that I think would make the TV revenue skyrocket. I mean, you agree with that, don't you, Nevada?
Well, I think also, you'd be cutting out you're not going to have the week 11 Alabama versus Mercer games. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yep.
they're going to be the way, go by the way of the dodo. And as you said, when you think about in the NFL game, every game's competitive. Well, that's the way, that would be the new thing about college football. It wouldn't be, you try to peak for your 3 or 4 games a year or whatever it is. You're going to have to bring it every week. So it's moving towards a more professionalism of the game, which we've already seen with NIL. I mean, NIL's basically created almost a professional free agency and the portal, professional free agency on demand at these colleges. Well, I think it's going to result in a more professional, more regimented, more balanced type of schedule situation for college football going forward. And it's going to be different. I'm not sure if I like the differences of college football. I kind of celebrate those. A lot of people don't like that. I think change is coming, and I think it's coming right fast.
Yeah, and obviously everything kind of begins and ends with the college football playoff. That is kind of where everybody has their mind wrapped around. Anymore, if you don't make the playoffs, it's almost like a lost season, which is sad. Even though we won the Rose Bowl last year. I mean, I still, as a former player, would prefer to make the Rose Bowl and win the Rose Bowl than play Georgia and lose by 4 touchdowns. But that's just me. I think it's nice to go out on a win. I think that morale-wise it's better. It's not me being a loser. It's just reality. Georgia was really good last year. They saw what they did to Michigan. We saw what Michigan did to us. So, sometimes, your wishes are granted and you don't even realize it. But, implications for the college football playoff, if the super conference stuff starts to make hay. I mean, obviously there's, it's almost assured that the playoffs are going to go to an 8-team playoff. I hate that personally. Do you think that it could go higher than 8 teams, in the 5 to 10 years that you're projecting the super conferences?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about the timing. We always talk about timing being dicey, but I think the expansion of the playoff is inevitable. If you look at the evolution of the NCAA basketball tournament, I mean, the basketball tournament, I think, started with 4 teams, and now it's 70 or whatever the heck it is. And I think the expansion of that is inevitable, especially if they're going to a more NFL type of model. I think the implications for college football just in general of potentially more games, potentially less games or no games against out of super conference opponents, balanced schedules. And they're going to be asking a lot more of these players. And like I said, I think the playoff is not going to look anything like that we've seen before. It's going to be more of an NFL type of seeded type of playoff setup, and it's going to be very interesting to watch how this whole thing comes down, because I'm not sure everybody's got their arms wrapped around how seismic the changes are coming for college football, but they're big. I mean, it's kind of like NIL. We talked about NIL, and a few of us were saying, "Hey, you guys don't have any idea what you're unleashing here," and people laughed at us. They were like, "Oh, that's silly. It won't change it at all, and nothing matters here." And it's changed everything. It's turned college football on its head, and now they're trying to put Pandora's box back, and it's hard. But I see a similar thing with this. I think this thing is coming down. I think the money is so big that what we're talking about is something that has to happen. And if history's any guide, they will not have thought through all the implications of this. And when it hits, it's going to hit like a hurricane. So people better buckle up.
Yeah, and that is a perfect correlation when you talk about NIL and people not thinking it through and thinking, oh well, the seniors will be able to have a chance to drive a car around, and it's like, nah, it's the freshmen, it's the high school seniors, the high school juniors that are reaping the rewards. I mean, the kids that are the most valuable to people in the NIL game are freshmen, because you could potentially have a business dealing with them for 3 years. If they're a superstar, it's a Trey Henderson, a Jackson Smith and Jigba. CJ Stroud is a freshman. Those are the guys that you want to, attach to. And now, granted, last year was different because it was the first year of it. But, freshmen, we saw a 5-star tackle from Georgia who transferred, and 247 Sports reported it's between Florida State and Miami, and NIL is going to play a huge part in it, AKA cut me a check. And I'm telling you, like, after watching the Peacocks from the basketball tournament and have the 3 of their best players hit the portal right after the tournament, it's going to happen in football. Remember where you heard it. You're going to have a superstar freshman like a CJ Stroud have a great bowl game and hit the portal and go to the highest bidder. I'm not saying it's going to be CJ, but there's going to be some kid who's going to have 1 year left of eligibility. Maybe his buddies are declaring for the NFL, and he transfers somewhere and he goes to, in Alabama, Georgia, some team that's got great infrastructure, great returning skill, maybe not a great quarterback, and just name the price. Or it could be a package deal where, say, you get like a Jackson Smith and Jigba and a CJ Stroud, both for their last year of college. Like, I think that's going to be something that is going to happen at some point, where these kids are going to say, it's no different than the kid from Florida International that was the tackle who was a freshman All-American, started every game as a freshman, played great, and then he transfers to LSU after a year. It's a whole different ball of wax. And until they tamp down, especially the transfer portal, because I think that's the thing that they really got to start to regulate and not allow kids to transfer whenever they want. It's going to be insane. To continue this for a second, Nevada, you've talked at length about one of the things you dread potentially about a college football playoff would be kind of the lessening of games like the Michigan game. Talk a little bit about that. If we go to 8 teams and then if we go to 16 teams, like what are your fears about a game like the Michigan game with Ohio State?
Well, I just think if you look historically at what, go back and look at what teams are number 7 and 8 in the country, or heaven forbid, 11 and 12 or 15 and 16. And you just see teams that just are not championship worthy. And it's, I've always loved the creative tension of the regular season in college football, because I feel like it's a season-long tournament where you're demanding excellence at every turn. While a loss isn't, doesn't disqualify you for the playoff, it makes your life really difficult in terms of making it. And I contrast it to college basketball, where the regular season doesn't matter. It's like, you get your 24 wins, you're going to make the playoff, and whether you're number team, the 8 seed like North Carolina was this year and made the final, or the 2 seed, it doesn't matter. So I hate the fact that there'd be anything that happens that we lose that creative tension of the regular season, which I think is the greatest spectacle in all sports. Just that feel when you see those upsets and you feel the whole season kind of circling the drain, and you rescue it or you don't rescue it, and you're all in despair. It's just, like I said, college football is it's a wonderful, dramatic story every week, and anything that diminishes that, I think college football is going to be poorer for it, and I think us as fans, we're all gonna miss it for sure.
Yeah, and that's like something with the NFL, the 17-game season. You see teams that are 9 and 8 that are in contention on the last weekend to make it, and you see teams that are 10 and 7 to make the playoffs. I mean, literally a 7-loss team has a chance to win the Super Bowl, has a chance to win the national championship, and that is something that I think really it cheapens the regular season when you know that you can make multiple mistakes and still make it in. I hate that. I mean, back in the olden times when I played in 06-07, it was literally you had to be in the top 2 to make the championship. So I mean, there was no margin for error. I mean, we were lucky in 07, luckiest team maybe in history to make the championship game. We lost second to last week, and then like a ripple effect of things happening. It got us, we backdoored into the championship against LSU as the 1 seed, which was crazy. But, you know, that you can't bank on that. You can't think on that. And I just, you know, I think the more you talk about how college football, you know, tinkers with the playoffs, you look around, you know, the NBA has a play-in tournament now. The NFL just expanded their playoffs this year, literally. I mean, so I think people, this obsession with playoff football and playoff sports, you know, it's going to lead to expansion. And I think that it's bad for the game. I hate the fact that, you know, I don't want to see number 1 Georgia play number 16, you know, Purdue. You know, I mean, that's going to be just god awful to watch. And I don't know if the solution is to have the top 4 teams have a bye week. I don't know what the solution is, because I mean, it's hard enough to get a good number 4 team that Georgia doesn't throttle or Bama doesn't throttle or whoever. But you know, you get to 16, man, it is going to be like playing, you know, Mercyhurst, you know, week 1, and nobody wants to watch that. But in closing, you said 5 to 10 years. I mean, I remember specifically that Jim Tressel in 2010 called all this. He called super conferences. He called realignment. He said it was happening behind the scenes, and sure as can be, Trust knew. And here we are. You think 5 to 10 years and this is going to look dramatically different?
Oh, I think there's no question about it, and I think it's happening. I think, you know, things are it's just bubbling below the surface right now, but I think it's just getting ready to bust. And I think for college football fans, you know, we're just talking about that 06 1 versus 2 Michigan game. I hate to be in a situation where people are sitting out that game, you know, on rest. You talk about the NFL. The NFL teams are, you know, 14-3 through the regular season, or 14-2 as the week 17 nobody plays. You know what I'm saying? I'd hate to see the Michigan game be a thing where guys are sitting and not playing because it doesn't matter. Much like we're seeing in a lot of the bowl games right now, where kids are sitting. I hope we never lose that. I think these changes are happening, and I'm really concerned. I hope that the powers that be in college football are wise about it. I'm excited about the potential of USC. I think USC is absolutely driving this because they know they have to make a move, and I think the Big Ten makes a lot of sense. But I'm a little concerned about what we have in store for us over the next 5-10 years, and you know, cautiously optimistic that we'll have a good outcome on this.
Yeah, well, this has been an incredible show. I appreciate you, my man. I'm going to wrap this thing up. Again, you know, this is just one of those topics where nobody has the goods on this like Nevada does. I mean, when we were going through the COVID stuff in 2020, I mean, he had the goods on that. I mean, there's this, you know, we have a lot of things that we're really tight on, and you know, the expansion stuff we've been pretty nails on. So thank you, Nevada, for that input, because it's just it's a whole different level of thought process and uniqueness, and it's just exciting to talk about because you just don't know who's going to end up shaking out with the Big Ten, who's going to end up where, you know, what the TV deals are going to look like, how many teams are going to be in the Super Conference, because you know, you see it coming, you see the haves and have-nots, you see Dabo Sweeney calling it out today. It's crazy. So if you want to be inside college football and you want to be inside Ohio State football, BuckeyeScoop.com is the spot. We have the most active message board in the entire network of Ohio State sites, really college football sites that put us up against anybody. Information is flowing, super active community. It's a great place to be. So we appreciate you, Scoop family. Again, in your comments below, down below, please let me know who you want to see join the Big Ten. Is it Washington? Is it Southern California? Is it somebody else? I mean, there's some crazy names out there that I think would make a lot of sense. And leave us a like if you're feeling friendly. We appreciate you guys. Thank you, Scoop family. Thank you, Buckeye Nation. You guys have a great night. Go Bucks.